Thinking of joining Voldemort's inner circle, are we? Now, before you can get that ever so prestigious death mark permanently etched into your left arm, you might want to know how to become a Death Eater. We have you covered before you can say
More murder!
Death Eaters were the most loyal followers of Voldemort. The group primarily consisted of radical pure-blood supremacists who practiced the dark arts with reckless abandon, malevolence, and without regard to or fear of wizarding law. Tom Riddle formed a group he named the Knights of WALPURGIS whilst a student at Hogwarts. Nearly all of those recruited were from Slytherin. The group would go on to become the Death Eaters. Voldemort used the group during both the First and Second Wizarding Wars, employing them as his elite force to take over wizard and muggle kind. The Death Eaters were considered Voldemort's inner circle and had the dark mark burned into their left forearms. When Voldemort touched one of them, each of the Death Eaters felt it, signaling for them to apparate to their leader's side. So what makes one eligible to become a Death Eater? J.K. Rowling never describes the initiation process, but one can infer that Voldemort is picky about whom he allows into his cozy little circle of Death Eaters. He probably recruits based on the following criteria: blood status, talent, being in a position to provide service, legacy, and being fully human. Now, above all things, Voldemort valued pure blood status. In a way, Voldemort felt that pure bloods increased his own status. I'd guess he also took perverse pleasure in recruiting pure bloods, because his own half-blood status continued to cause him great annoyance. Voldemort also wanted Death Eaters that were talented. The talented Slughorn goes into hiding to avoid recruitment, so I'd guess that talented Slytherins are at special risk of being approached. The Death Eaters probably kept an eye on the sympathies of talented witches and wizards to judge if any of them could be turned to the dark side. Another category of potential Death Eaters is anyone who could provide service or favour to Voldemort. Peter Pettigrew falls into this category because of his closeness to the Potters. Pettigrew was a useful spy, especially when the Potters made him their secret keeper. Draco Malfoy also fits this category, as his attendance at Hogwarts gives him access to Dumbledore and Harry Potter. Perhaps Voldemort also knows about the Vanishing Cabinet. Of course, Draco's assignment is also about punishing Lucius. I'd guess that for the most part Voldemort recruits you, though some interested followers may approach through back channels. Many Death Eaters appear to have joined because their fathers were Death Eaters. Draco Malfoy is an excellent example of this. He was raised to venerate Voldemort and hope for his resurrection so that the Malfoys could have a second chance at world domination. This explains the generational Death Eaters. Now, the final category for eligibility is to be fully human. We know that Voldemort will accept those who are not fully human, but they will never be true Death Eaters. Veneer Greyback is a prime example of this. Because he is not fully human, Voldemort cannot truly accept him as a Death Eater. So, what is the initiation process in becoming a Death Eater? Whilst there isn't a lot of information about the Death Eater initiation and induction process, we could imagine that it would be somewhat like the induction process of Hitler's inner circle. After all, it's no secret that J.K. Rowling took inspiration for Voldemort from Hitler and his Nazi regime. In the case of Hitler's SS, new members were required to meet an eligibility criteria, mostly centered on their pure or Aryan blood status, not similar from the Death Eaters. Coercion and blackmail were standard recruiting tactics, with new soldiers often being forced to join. They had to be tough, loyal, and pass stringent tests of racial purity. Initiation into the SS involved citing allegiance to Hitler, the Nazi Party, and being indoctrinated in their pure-blood ideologies. Now, I imagine the process for Voldemort's Death Eaters to have been very similar, while still being somewhat unique. It's easy to imagine that future Death Eaters would first need to prove their worth to Voldemort before being allowed to join his ranks. This could have been a series of tasks dependent on the weaknesses of the applicant. The applicant would only succeed at this task once they had proven their true loyalties were with Voldemort and his mission of pure blood supremacy. Each future Death Eater would have to pledge allegiance to Voldemort by reciting an oath. It would not at all be surprising if this oath was a magical binding contract that the witch or wizard had to abide by, similar to the unbreakable vow. The final step to the initiation process would be for the future Death Eater to receive the Dark Mark and officially join Voldemort's ranks, or inner circle as it were. We know from the Half-Blood Prince that Draco Malfoy took part in an initiation ceremony ritual in which he was branded with the Dark Mark and thus inducted into Voldemort's ranks. At least in Draco's initiation, a group of Voldemort sympathizers encircled an old cauldron. As Draco extended his left arm, the cauldron exploded with light and quickly the group dispersed, with Draco now having completed the initiation process. Death Eaters followed their leader's commands first and foremost, and he treated them ruthlessly, often sending them on impossible missions, and punishing them horribly if they failed him, even due to bad luck rather than incompetence. Now, above all, Voldemort was devoid of pity and could not tolerate failure. He cast Lucius Malfoy aside once he failed to retrieve the prophecy, and he was perfectly willing to punish or even kill Lucius and Bellatrix after hearing about the theft of the cup. He rewarded competence most of all, and any drop in standards would be met with derision and disregard. Although some Death Eaters appeared to have been fanatically loyal to Voldemort, such as Bellatrix Lestrange and Barty Crouch Jr., several only aligned with him for the ideals of purification and shared glory, such as Lucius Malfoy and Regulus Black, while many others seemed to serve him largely out of fear, such as Peter Pettigrew. As soon as he was defeated, many immediately renounced their loyalty and did not attempt to find Voldemort in the intervening years. In turn, even though Voldemort valued the services they provided and spoke as though they were a family, he saw them as no more than dispensable servants. Becoming a Death Eater meant a lifetime of service to Voldemort. Death Eaters had no opportunity to quit if the situation looked grim. Deserters would be marked for death. Igor Karkaroff deserted the Death Eaters after turning many of them over to the Ministry, and even though he went into hiding after his former master was revived, he was eventually caught and killed for his disloyalty. One thing is for certain, joining the Death Eaters is not for the faint of heart. If you liked that video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it on social media. Make sure you leave a comment down below and let me know what you think about today's video.